Good evening, everyone. My name is Chuck Knapp, and I oversee the Conservation and Research Department here at Shedd Aquarium. And it is my pleasure to welcome you here to Shedd. And we're very honored to co-host this event with the Chicago Council on Science and Technology. For those of you who are not aware of the Chicago Council, we share a similar mission to try to bridge the gap from science to the general public. And we thought that this was a wonderful opportunity to have a general lecture about how science and art, in some cases, can help advance conservation for corals in the Philippines. So again, thank you very much for being here. I just want to table set at the end of the lecture, we're going to be going to Wild Reef. And so just so you know, if you have any questions for our presenters, and if you can't ask them at the immediate end of their lecture, there'll be an opportunity to have conversations in Wild Reef with the lecturers, as well as with Shedd staff. We have George Parsons that's here in the front row, and he can talk about some of the work that we do with Seacor, which is a coral conservation research and education initiative throughout the world. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Elmira Gillis, who was the original idea bringer for this lecture tonight.
Thank you, Chuck. Yeah, I was not the originator of the idea. I just brought it from one place to another. And I would like to thank you and the Shedd Aquarium and the Chicago Council on Science and Technology for making this a reality for us. And of course, the SEA Institute for coming all the way here from the Philippines and from various parts of the US, Dr. Ken Carpenter from Old Dominion, for helping us with this presentation. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Deputy Consul General Romulo Victor Israel, otherwise known affectionately as Jun Israel, to just deliver some remarks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elmira Gillis. On behalf of Consul General, my boss, Generoso Calonghe, the staff of the Philippine Consulate General, the Filipino community in Chicago and the Midwest, I'm very happy and very honored to be here to represent the Philippines in this forum. Personally, I can say that talking about marine biodiversity in the Philippines is very personal because I come from a coastal town somewhere up north of Luzon. And if you've been following the news about Scarborough Shoal, I'm from that area. And also because of my background, I studied philosophy and theology. And October 4th is the feast day of St. Francis. So conservation, preservation of marine life is very personal to me. So again, again, I'd like to thank and honor all those who made this possible. Shed Aquarium, first of all, the people who are who love the Philippines and who love our marine biodiversity and are working to help us preserve this God's gift. Thank you all, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Deputy Counsel Jun. And now let's get on to the program proper. I would like to start by introducing two very special people associated with the CVIP, Robert Suntay and Berta Feliciano. Robert Suntay is president of CVIP Institute in the Philippines. He has been scuba diving and free diving for over 20 years around the world. He films marine documentaries to promote awareness and conservation efforts. Roberta Lopez Feliciano is the chairperson of the Sea Institute. The call of the sea came early with her at weekends at the beach and countless hours under the surface. She's very shy about sharing more about, but they have done wonderful, wonderful work in the Philippines. And I will hand over the stage to them so they can talk about their valuable work. Let's give them all a round of applause, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Roberta Feliciano, and I'm part of the Sea Institute. It's an organization that's focused entirely on the Verde Island Passage, or the VIP. And it's a strait in the Philippines, which is hemmed in by 5 provinces with communities living by the coastal area. So early on, my sister, Gina Lopez, she used to be the head of an ABS-CBN foundation and is now the head of the DENR in the Philippines, which is equal to the EPA here. She was approached by CAS, California Academy of Sciences, and they wanted her to help protect the VIP because they knew she was a staunch environmentalist and they felt that she had the resources to do it. And she said, you know, I love the idea, but right now I'm busy cleaning up the Pasig River. So at that meeting, she turned around and looked at me and she said, you do it. She said, you know, you have a home and you scuba dive. So, you know, I said, okay, so I did it. So this year we launched the Sea, and now we're here. And to tell you more about the programs of the Sea, I'd like to introduce a very good friend who's a world-class underwater videographer, and he sits on the board of WWF Philippines, and I suspect he has a pair of hidden gills. Robert Suntay.
Thank you, Berta. She said that because she's my boss, and she's a really, really good boss. Good evening to everyone, and thank you for making the time to join us this evening. So just really a little bit about CVIP and what we do, because the main feature of this event is coming up very soon. And I hope I know how to operate this remote properly. So, just so you know the big picture, literally, everyone knows about the Coral Triangle, which is one of the most biodiverse regions in the entire planet. If you will, this is the dartboard. If you zoom in on the Coral Triangle, you'll see that it's made up of 6 countries. I can't read it from here. If we can turn the front lights down, that would be great. But the 6 countries are the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Timor Leste, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. Whew, did it. Okay. So that's the Coral Triangle. That's closing towards the middle of the dartboard. If you zoom in a bit more, you have the Sulu-Sulawesi seascape, which is now comprised of 3 countries, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. But what is now regarded as the center of the center, the sweet spot, the bullseye of marine biodiversity is called the Verde Island Passage. And I won't say too much about it because that's what our two great speakers, Dr. Kent Carpenter and Lynn Funkhauser, will be telling you about. So let me just briefly tell you about the work that we do. CVIP is actually an acronym. C stands for Science, Education, and Advocacy. VIP stands for the Verde Island Passage. While we love scientists and we love research and we love all the work that they do, we do not do research for the sake of pure research alone. All the research that we strive to generate will be geared towards actual action-oriented projects on the ground to ensure that we give the locals the power, the authority, the skills, and the capabilities to do actual projects that will preserve and protect the reefs in their areas. The model that we're following is working with these people to turn them into what we call citizen scientists. And there are six different modules that can characterize our different approaches. But at the end of the day, the standard by which we will judge our success is to make sure that all the work that is done is sustainable over the long term, sustainable for the coral, for the fish, for the people who live there, and hopefully longer term for the planet in general. So there are three main projects that we are going to be leading off with. First is working with locals to help them protect the reefs that are right in their areas. This is a photo taken some years back. Here on the left is Terry Gosliner from the California Academy of Sciences, who has been working for almost 15 years now with a community in the Philippines to protect a reef called Pulang Buli. They did not do anything artificial, nothing planted, nothing taken away. All they did was help the locals preserve and safeguard the reef, and the reef has almost miraculously regenerated in just 10 years, when normally it would take decades and decades for this to happen. In order to set the stage for that, the important thing is awareness and education. So one of our other projects is working with local public schools in the areas right by the sea to make sure that the teachers, the students, and even the locals understand why their reefs are so important and what they can do as individuals to preserve those reefs. Finally, on a more practical side, we are working with a group that will be teaching locals how to free dive. Scuba diving is something that tends to be a bit complicated, a bit expensive, but when you free dive, all you need is a pair of fins, mask, snorkel, and a relatively decent set of lungs. And with the right training, we are IDA certified free divers. You can actually go down to shallow parts of the reef and observe what's going on. Is there coral bleaching? Is there cyanide fishing? Is there dynamite fishing? Are there algae? Are they crown of thorns, etc., etc.? So a lot of it is just training the locals what to watch out for so they can report when things are going good or when things are not going so good. So that's just a very quick overview of what we wanted to present. Kent and Lynn will be telling you more details, but I'd like to end with a very short video. If they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, I'd like to think a video is worth 1,000,000. So I hope you will enjoy this short video of the beauty, the importance, and the delicate fragility of what lies beneath the Verde Island Passage. Thank you.
mistakes in the lines of your face when you say my name. Because when this ends, I want someone to blame. Isn't that twisted? My love, isn't that twisted? My love, I am so twisted. My love.
thank you, Robert, for such a fascinating trip to a world that I would not otherwise see. I'm not a diver, and so, you know, it's a privilege to see what's underneath our oceans. Next on the program is Dr. Kent Carpenter. He is a professor in biological science at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia. He has been studying coral reefs in the Philippines for over 40 years, first as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer and now as a visiting scientist. Let's give it up for Dr. Kent Carpenter.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to explain to you why the Verde Island Passage is one of the most remarkable places on the planet. And I'd also like to try to tell you that it's also a place that we should really spend a lot of effort in terms of conservation action. So I'm a scientist, and I will try to explain this in non-scientific terms as best as I can. But I'd also like to bring a bit of a historical perspective because I have been studying the coral reefs in the Verde Island Passage for over 40 years. Okay, so let's see where we are here. Okay, so as we already explained, the Philippines is in a part of the world called the Coral Triangle. It's considered a center of marine biodiversity because it has the highest concentration of marine species of any place in the world. And it was first described as a center of biodiversity through the corals themselves. So the Coral Triangle has about 70% of the total coral reef-building corals of the world. There are around 700 species of reef-building corals worldwide, and over 600 of these occur right in the Coral Triangle. Just to give you a little bit of a perspective, the Caribbean region in the entire Caribbean region only has about 60 species of corals. So they're 1/10 the number of corals in the Caribbean as there are in the Coral Triangle. Okay, so I did a similar sort of study where I'd used maps in order to try to understand the concentration of species in the Western Pacific. And what we did was we looked at a wide range of different species. We looked at 3,000 maps, distribution maps of species, from seaweeds all the way up to marine mammals. And this included primarily the fishes. So when we looked at the overlap of these species distributions, we found that the top 10% of this diversity is concentrated in the Philippines itself. What we did was we coined the term the center of the center because we found essentially an epicenter of marine biodiversity in the center of biodiversity, which is the Coral Triangle. Okay. So part of this study also brought on a little bit of a controversy because most people expected the center of biodiversity to be south of the Philippines in eastern Indonesia. This is where it was expected, a little bit closer to the equator. But since that time, there have been a number of studies which have corroborated, which have supported the work that we originally did in 2005. And for example, one study using a large number of invertebrate maps showed that the highest concentration of invertebrates is also taxonomist by the name of Jerry Allen. Now, Jerry Allen was upset with the fact that I had found the Philippines as having the highest concentration of marine species because he was convinced it should be found in eastern Indonesia. So he actually set out to disprove the center of the center in the central part of the Philippines, and he did that by looking at a very large number of coral fishes maps. And when he did this, instead of disproving my finding of the center of the center. Instead, his work actually showed the highest concentration of coral reef fishes also in the central part of the Philippines. And this controversy is now totally put to rest. There was a graduate student a few years back who looked at all of the reef fishes and all of the shore fishes of the entire Indo-Pacific. He put these together all in a large GIS study and basically showed the same sort of pattern with the highest concentration being found in the Philippines. And of course, if you add in a bunch of invertebrates as well, I don't know where this is. Okay, this is not changing. Okay, and so if you add in invertebrates as well, then you also come up with the same sort of a pattern. So the question now is no longer if the Philippines has the highest concentration of marine species in the world. The question really is why, okay? So the answer to that is that there are many reasons why the Philippines has the highest concentration of marine species in the world, and probably the only place in the world where you find this combination of different factors is found in the Philippines. So I'm going to very briefly describe 7 of the main reasons why the Philippines has the highest concentration of marine species. So the first reason is that, excuse me. Okay, so the first reason is that the Philippines has a, can you put the lights down a little bit? We're getting a request that it's hard to see, I guess. The lights in the front at least are down a little bit. Okay. So the first reason is that the Philippines has the highest concentration of tropical coastline of any place in the world. Okay, imagine the Philippines is a place of over 7,000 islands, and the Philippine coastline is actually equivalent to the coastline of the entire United States. So imagine the coastline of the entire United States convoluted and concentrated in a very, very small part of the world. This concentration of coastline allows for many, many different habitats. Not only do you have coral, seagrass, and mangrove habitats, but because of these different configurations of coastline, you can have different types of coral reef habitats, different types of seagrass habitats, and different types of mangrove habitats, as well as mud bottom habitats. So these different habitats allow for many different species to inhabit the central part of the Philippines. Another thing that the Philippines has is latitudinal diversity. Okay, the Indonesia is centered along the equator. So it's centered along the equator, and it's found strictly in the tropical zone. The Philippines, on the other hand, is actually found in the subtropic zone. So the very northern part of the Philippines is in the subtropical zone. Sorry. And this actually allows many subtropical species to occur in the Philippines as well. So these are the sorts of species that you wouldn't find further south in Indonesia. Another thing that the Philippines and the Coral Triangle in general enjoys is stability through time, and this is with regard to the temperature of the oceans there. So just east of the Coral Triangle is a region of the ocean, a very large part of the ocean called the Pacific Warm Pool, and it actually has the highest temperature, the highest sea surface temperatures of any places on the planet. This actually influences a lot of our climate around the globe, and it also provides stability for habitats in the Philippines and in the Coral Triangle through time. So in the last 100,000 years, there were several ice ages. These ice ages cooled down the waters around this region, but because of its proximity to the Pacific Warm Pool, these temperatures were not lowered very dramatically in the Coral Triangle, allowing stability for species to survive. Another thing about the Coral Triangle is that it's in the crossroads of 2 entirely different biotas. So you have the Pacific Ocean, which has a lot of species that are only found in the Pacific Ocean. You have to the east, you have the Indian Ocean, which has many species which are only found in the Indian Ocean. So you have 2 different biotas, and these actually overlap in the Coral Triangle. So you find both Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean species inhabiting this region. Another very interesting thing about the Coral Triangle itself is that it appears to be a place where, where species are actually evolving. And this happens when there's isolation of populations. So during the ice ages, the sea level went down dramatically, down 120 meters, almost 400 feet. And this happened when the ice caps were formed. It sucked a lot of the water out of the ocean, exposing the shallow seabed. The shallow seabed, when it was exposed, actually caused a barrier in different parts around the Philippines and in the Coral Triangle, and isolating different basins there, which when you have an isolation of basins, you're essentially allowing populations to become separate from one another. When this happens over a long period of time, as it did during the ice ages, the genetics of the populations will drift apart. And when sea level finally goes up again, allowing these populations to recombine, if the genetics is different enough, these will no longer be able to reproduce successfully, and therefore you have essentially a new species. So sea levels went up and down several times during the ice ages, and this allowed the basins to be isolated several times during these periods. Another interesting thing about the Philippines are the many strong currents that go through the region. We've been studying the population genetics of species in the Philippines, and we're finding that some of the strong currents that go through the Philippines actually also help to isolate populations. So there's one current that goes through the middle of the Sulu Sea. It's called the Sulu Sea through flow. And this Sulu Sea through flow essentially serves to isolate the eastern and western sides of the Philippines, because the larvae of marine organisms, essentially the seeds that are at the mercy of ocean currents, these things cannot move across these strong ocean currents because they're simply swept southward. So they're swept southward, and this isolates populations on either side of the Philippines. So we're finding that the population genetics of fishes in this region are very, very different. This is another reason why species can actually evolve in the Philippines. Another remarkable thing about the Coral Triangle is that it's essentially the target of two of the most powerful currents on the planet. These are the northern and southern equatorial currents, which go across the entire expanse of the Pacific Ocean, both north and south of the equator. And these very strong currents wash into the Coral Triangle. Now, on their way to the Coral Triangle, they're actually going across thousands of isolated islands. These isolated islands also have different species living on them, and this action of the current can essentially sweep species into the Coral Triangle, and they survive quite nicely there because of the many different habitats. And the final reason why the Philippines is a very remarkable place is because of its very unique geology. So the Philippines, 55 million years ago, didn't actually exist as an archipelago. And in fact, 55 million years ago, the only parts of the Philippines that were actually above water was a part, the Mindoro and Palawan region, which were in an archipelago continuous with present-day Taiwan. So that's the only part of the Philippines that was above water 55 million years ago. Luzon and the western Visayan region of the Philippines were actually just a shallow sea at this time. And the eastern Philippines, the eastern Visayan region, the Bicol region and Mindanao also were just a shallow sea. This location is actually about 1,000 kilometers away. This is where present-day Papua New Guinea is. This is where present-day Borneo is. So these were the precursors to the present-day Philippines. If you jump ahead about 5 million years, you see that the Luzon and the western Visayan region, arose de novo from the ocean floor because of volcanic activity. And jump ahead another 5 million years, the eastern Visayan region of the Philippines, the Bicol region, and also Mindanao also arose de novo from the ocean floor because of volcanic activity. And then at about 32 million years ago, because of the strong action and the strong movement and the strong movement of tectonic plates, there was a fault that occurred just to the west of Palawan in Mindoro here. Remember, Mindoro is the southern part of the Verde Island Passage. So it was, at this time, this fault occurred, which allowed Mindoro and Palawan to then break away from present-day Taiwan. So if we jump forward another 5 years, 20 million years ago, Mindoro was actually off of an area north of present-day Luzon. About 10 million years ago, Mindoro was just off to the west of the Bolinao region in Pangasinan. And 5 million years ago, the Bicol region finally connects with Luzon. And then what you see today is where Mindoro is, just south of Luzon. So there's many reasons why the Philippines has this concentration, many factors that combine together and probably are only found in the world in the Philippines where these species are able to accumulate. So let me get back just a little bit to that original study that we did where we looked at the concentration of species based on these 3,000 maps that we did. One thing that we found was that the maximum number of species overlap was 1,736. And when we looked at where this occurred, where this maximum number of species were accumulating, we found that it was found in the Verde Island Passage. So this was found just below Luzon, in between Luzon and Mindoro. This area is the Verde Island Passage. And the only area in this study that showed a concentration, the maximum concentration, is in the Verde Island Passage. And this is what my computer looked like when I was trying to discover where this concentration, where this maximum number of species was. And the maximum number of species, 1,736, there was only 1 pixel. So my unit of study was essentially a 10 kilometer by 10 kilometer area. And there was only 1 pixel that had the maximum number of species. And this was found, right, of course, in the Verde Island Passage. Now, normally you can consider this maybe to be just some sort of a random combination of events. But in fact, this 1 pixel of 1,736 was surrounded by the only 4 pixels of 1,735 and the only 5 pixels of 1,734. So this overlap of species really only is concentrated in the Verde Island Passage. So this is the reason why we refer to this region of the world as the center of marine biodiversity, because it has the highest concentration of marine species on the planet. Now, in addition to GIS studies, we have been doing a number of actual on-the-ground surveys. So we have been surveying around the Philippines, around the Coral Triangle, and the on-the-ground numbers also tell us that the Verde Island Passage is very remarkable and has a higher concentration. More species appear to be accumulated in the Verde Island Passage than any other place. Now, that's the good news. The bad news here is that there was a study done in around 2002 that actually used an index of threat factors on coral reefs around the world. So they did a study comparing different coral reef areas around the world, and they had a threat factor from a very low of 1 to the highest of 3 in terms of threats to coral reefs. And they found, unfortunately, that the Philippines had one of the highest threat factors of any of these other areas of the world. Now, this is because the Philippine coral reefs have been exposed to a lot of damaging fisheries practices, dynamite fishing, many other destructive fishing practices are happening there. There also is a lot of habitat degradation from such things as sedimentation, which covers over coral reefs. So that's the bad news. The good news is that things are actually happening that are helping the Philippines. Now, this is just to show that I was actually in the Philippines in 1975. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer there. I had the best job in Peace Corps that ever was and ever will be, because I was actually in charge of coral reef research in the Philippines as part of the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources. And if you can't figure out which one I am, that's me right there. We're sitting together with Dodong Peña, who's one of the old-time divers in the Philippines, and another Peace Corps volunteer. And we're actually looking at corals which had been collected, and they were on the beach being dried because back in the 1970s, there was wholesale ripping up of coral reefs at that time in order to sell dried white coral as curios in ornamental curio markets. That practice has stopped. So that's one practice that, thanks to international regulations, has stopped. So the factors that have caused a lot of the degradation in the Philippines is starting to be reversed. And in 1975, I was studying Tagalog at the University of the Philippines in Los Baños, and I grabbed a mask and a snorkel in 1975 and took a bus down to the Anilao area and jumped in the water and was absolutely amazed. In 1975, the Philippines had the best coral reefs in the world. Absolutely amazing. The amount of species of fishes and corals that you encounter there is just absolutely mind-boggling. And I've been going back to the Philippines ever since. And I've been going back very regularly. So in the 1970s, it was absolutely gorgeous. I started going back in the 80s and 90s. And then at that time, there were actually a lot of cumulative environmental impacts from destructive fishing methods, from habitat degradation. And the coral reefs in the Verde Island Passage were looking quite bad, in fact, in the 80s and 90s. Fortunately, because of a renewed interest in marine conservation and the idea that the Philippines is a center of the center, I think this brought a lot of pride to Filipinos and a lot of impetus to actually conserve coral reefs. Anilao now, the area in the Verde Island Passage, is now being conserved very actively. And this active conservation is actually working. We're mitigating the decades of abuse in coral reefs in the Philippines by active conservation effort. And so we've actually can see the difference. So I've seen the Philippines as the absolute best. I've seen it at its absolute worst, and now it's getting much better again. And so we really need to redouble our efforts in terms of conservation action. Okay, so that's all I have to say, and I don't know if we'll have time for any questions.
Thank you, Kent. That was very informational. As on a personal note, I spent all of my summers growing up in Puerto Galera. And so from Batangas, I would cross the Verde Island Passage. And I remember when I was a young child, all these schools or pods, I think that's what they're called, of dolphins just jumping right alongside our boat. And I don't see them anymore. So yes, it's really time to try and get really serious about conservation. We have another treat for you if the images are ready. Lynn Funkhauser was inducted into the Women Divers Hall of Fame. She was a consultant here at the Shedd Aquarium in the Wild Reef exhibit, which you will see after the presentations, which brought Apple Island in the Philippines to Chicago. She was the first volunteer at Shedd Aquarium in 1971. Let's give it up for Lynn Funkhauser, if her images are ready.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ken, for proving that I wasn't lying all these years when I claimed the Philippines was the richest area in the entire world. The scientists proved me right. Could we kill the lights, please? MGM has their line. There's color here if we don't have to fight the lights. So the Philippines is the center of biodiversity and the apex of the coral triangle. We're going to take you to Anilao, which is part of the VIP. It's a 90-mile drive from Manila. Amazing that you have got the world's best diving 90-mile drive from Manila. This is a perfect day in Batangas. People know it for its macro life, but the fish life is amazing. And these walls are just spectacular. That frogfish can sit here for years. Here's dinner. And as you notice at the bottom, he's named an awful lot of these. This one, when I got there in 1975, as Dr. Carpenter did, was unnamed. I was, without my scientific degree, didn't know it. But if you're not seeing 10 broncs on every dive, then you're just probably not looking. And there's so many nudibranchs that sometimes you get photobombed by another nudibranch when you're taking a picture of the first nudibranch. This is a gray goddess. I found it in yellow, but the next day they were mating, and there was a gray one. Species that mate at the same time. Here we have one laying eggs. But we all love kind of collected Spanish dancers over the year. Here we have one dancing, and then settling back to the substrate. And then there's always a shrimp, it seems, that is living with it symbiotically, an emperor shrimp. And then here we have Spanish dancers mating. And it took me 20 years to actually find a Spanish dancer laying eggs. And here we have the eggs. And this year I got this rosé of Spanish dancer eggs. Next day, hoping I would find things that looked a little more like Spanish dancers, but it was gone. So they had hatched. And we photographers can sometimes contribute to science. I show my work to Dr. Goslinger often, and he knew of this nudibranch, but he didn't know the food source, which happens to be a nocturnal anemone. We also have lots of shells. This is a little soft coral shell. When I switched from film to digital, it was quite traumatic. So I decided I was going to give homes to homeless octopus. And I found this beautiful bivalve, and I took it out and I gave it to that octopus. And before I could even pick my camera up, it grabbed it and it helped itself to a new condo. And it looked at me. And then it decided I was not a threat, so it decided to move. And so it put a lot of effort into moving this shell. And then when my buddies came along and I just gave her the octopus, I'd already spent 45 minutes with it and I went on to other things. But I left and I went to Dumaguete and was gone for about 3 weeks. And I came back and we found it on a night dive. It had moved 30 feet to the east and we had found it in 30 deep, and it was 10 feet and was buried in 10 feet of sand. So it had moved quite a long way. It liked my condo. We've got all kinds of octopus. We've got mimics. We've got ocelot, and this one has eggs. And this year on my list was the blue ring, and you can see they're very cryptic. But when they're out hunting, then you get the beautiful blue rings. And here we have one swimming. And at night, you can find all kinds of squid. And you see them during the day, too, but they're a little easier to photograph at night. E.T. found home. Here we have a squid egg about to hatch. And a bobtail squid. And flamboyant cuttlefish. We photographers love these. And if you're real patient, you can see that hidden tentacle come out. And I only have one photograph of crinoids, but we have every color and species imaginable, and they're nature's Velcro. I really love crabs. They seem to have more personality than anything. This is a little sponge crab. This one has anemones on its back. And the dive guides, we've turned a lot of the fishermen into dive guides, and the really best ones are making $20 a dive because they're that good. I give them my list, and they absolutely deliver. I wanted a mantis with eggs. He got me 2 of them. We have beautiful fish. This is a spine cheek angel. Lots of butterflies. This is an 8-bar butterfly. This happens to be a juvenile blue trigger. I've only seen a couple of them. They grow up to be kind of nondescript. Long-nosed hawkfish, all kinds of parrotfish. And we've got some bizarre stuff, too, that's really fun. Devil scorpionfish. Happen to love the eels. And often when you find eels, you'll find cleaner shrimp and cleaner wrasses around them. This was an unexpected pleasure. I had not seen golden moray since I took the Shed Aquarium to Anilau, and this was the 3rd one I've ever seen in my life. This is a juvenile. It grows up and it's kind of a brown color. And it seemed to hang out with this miniata grouper. And they were just buddies. And I went back 2 times before, then I was leaving the next day, or I'd be still there trying to get the behavior where the groupers and the eels hunt together. And then the other behavior that just blows my mind, and I wish somebody could tell me, the anthias and some of the other fish have always got their tails in predators' mouths. And it's just amazing to me. And here we are again. So if somebody could explain that to me and get inside those fish's heads, I'd appreciate it. I took this picture in 1980, and Nat Geo called it a perfect photograph. So I went back to find my anemone, and it is still there. So I'm probably the only person in the world that has a relationship with an anemone for 36 years. That's my favorite dive guide, Obit. He can deliver any fish I want. And so I go in with my crazy list this year. I said I want a red paddle flap or Eschenmeyer rhinopeus. On my birthday, he gave me that. And he threw in a rhinopeus frondosa for good measure. And really at the top of my list was a purple lacy. And so the next day he gave me this one. And you hang around a long time until you get them to yawn. We're going to leave Anilau and cross over to Porto Galera, which is also in the VIP. Dr. Terry Goslinger was there with about 30 scientists last year. Here he is collecting nudibranchs and then photographing him and putting in the little slip of paper with them. and then back in the lab doing his work with the microscope. And Gustav allowed me to look at some of his things. He brought a piece of black velvet and let me photograph some of his specimens. But I would never have seen this particular brittle star had he not allowed me to do that. A little hermit crab. And then those strings that you see underwater that are white or orange belong to that worm. This is how I carry my gear in the Philippines. And did I mention that this is the world's best diving and the world's nicest people? I'm going to take you on one of my favorite dives. This is the canyons, and that's Hole in the Wall. And that opens up to spectacular. Now, this is 90 feet deep, and there's current, but it is in these soft corals. Now, I get two complaints about the Philippines. One is there are too many fish, they get in the way. And two, there's no dead coral, so I can't put a hand down. I am so sorry. If you're patient, you could get your critter without all the fish. And get your buoyancy adjusted. You don't need to put your hand down. It's full of sweet lips. I didn't know sweet lips are 3 feet long. Sometimes, if left alone. And you just go rolling through this canyon, and you come to this huge anchor, and you know that it's time to do your safety stop. But there's everything in all the Verde Island Passage. I'm only showing you a drop of what's here. A fluted clam, and they're growing giant clams in Clam City, and they actually have a guy sitting in a boat on top of them, guarding them. I was just there with David Duboulet and Jen Hayes, and she called him Clam Man. We've got Wonder Puss. You want pygmy seahorses? Tell your guide, they know where they are. Redfin basslets. Frogfish. This is a frogfish egg. Here we have a hairy frog. They can gobble up 1/6 of a second. Now this is your normal black hairy frogfish. And last year I found this one. I call it my Bob Marley frogfish. I think it's a new species. They told me it isn't. I am sure when somebody gets time to name it, they will, and do the DNA on it and everything. We've got mandarins. Got to have a dory fish now. Cleaning stations are fabulous. Emperor angel. Stargazers. And here's the lure. How would you like that in your mouth? We've got a nice wreck, the Alma Jane. And it's full of batfish, one of my most favorite critters in the world. It's in about 100 feet, and they do technical dives on it, but you don't need to be technical to dive it. That's the stern at 100 feet. And here's Verde Island. I mean, again, too many fish, perfect coral, absolutely stunning. Some pretty good currents, so you got to time your times here. But it's stunning. And lately we've been doing blackwater diving. This is the greatest migration. Here we have the reflection of a juvenile flying fish, a half-beak. Now you're hanging in 1,000 feet of water in black water at night, trying to keep up with the boat because it's going to leave you and it's drifting, and shooting these things. So it's interesting diving. There's a larval mantis shrimp, but they're coming up with such fabulous things. So can't wait to do more of this. They didn't give me time to show you the guaranteed thresher sharks in Malapascua, or the whale sharks in Aslab, or the sardines in Moalbal, or fabulous Tubataha with its perfect coral reefs and its big fish and schools of fish. But you do get to visit Apple Island tonight, and Wild Reef is done on Apple Island. That's Dr. Alcohol, who's my personal hero. He's responsible for over 400 marine protected areas in the Philippines. Has done an amazing, this was a blasted reef in '85. Absolutely stunning coral. He's a herpetologist, and he managed to save the sea turtles, the endangered crocodiles, and all these marine protected areas. So have fun tonight and enjoy Wild Reef. It's spectacular.
Well, on behalf of Shedd Aquarium and the Chicago Council on Science and Technology, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd particularly like to say thank you to our speakers, Robert, Kent, and a special treat with Lynn. Thank you so much. Because of time, and we want to be respectful of your time, and also we want to provide you the opportunity to see Wild Reef, we're going to have to hold questions. However, we do have the opportunity for 45, 50 minutes to be in Wild Reef, where I encourage you to speak, to talk and ask questions with all our speakers, please. We also have George Parsons, who can talk about our coral restoration and research work in the Caribbean with Sea Corps. So really, this is an opportunity to have further conversation. So I encourage you, please stay and enjoy. And thank you all again for coming. And I should say, so just if you go out back, we'll have volunteers that will guide you to the upstairs elevators, and the elevators will take you down to Wild Reef, and then you'll have the opportunity to enjoy the space.